So good morning, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Lee Biggenden. I'm the co-founder of Nefos Technologies. Joined today by Ross Asquith, Product Marketing Manager for EMEA for Netskope. Morning, Ross. Thanks for joining us. And today we're going to be talking to you about Netskope's Zero Trust Network Access and SASE platform, and really how that's being used to enable remote working. In terms of agenda, what we're going to piece through today is a little quick introduction into Nefos, who we are, what we're doing. I'm going to touch on a little bit about ZTNA and SASE generally, just as a bit of context, before handing over to Ross, who's going to run through the Netskope platform. No demo today. And then we're going to close out with some Q&A. So from our perspective, who are we? Who are Nefos? So we are a consultancy-led data services integrator. And our role really is to help our customers kind of solve complex data problems. And that could range from optimizing storage performance for genomic processing, using data for AI and ML platforms to gain better customer insights, or securing data that's resident in clouds, or anything in between, really. And since we opened the doors in 2013, we've shown consistent growth, with average revenue growth of 120+% over the past 4 years, 98% customer retention on average. So, and we kind of put that down to the fact that we are consultancy led, and a lot of our focus is really around innovation and supporting our customers to drive real value from their data sets. I think it's obvious for everyone that data is the lifeblood of most companies these days, and that's only going to grow. And in most cases, traditional infrastructure isn't geared up to support the demands that are being placed on it today. Now, whether that's from a security and governance perspective or just a straight data processing perspective, ultimately our customers are looking for new ways of driving value from their data, and that's what we help them deliver on. And we came to market in the first place because we felt that there was a lack of kind of integration partners out there for customers that were really focused on data, that could provide independent expertise to help them guide their strategy, and deliver on data transformation programs. And really that's the gap that we came to market to fill. And our goal really is to make sure that we provide our clients with that independent expertise, whether that's through consulting, whether it's through helping them deliver on projects, or whether it's operationalizing that infrastructure or service afterwards. That's how we're working with our clients. And I think that's really why we've been able to maintain the level of value, if you like, with our clients, and maintain our customers and growth rates. We've, as part of that, kind of developed our own data services framework. There's 3 core areas of focus as part of that. Firstly, around storage optimization. So how do we drive or use new technology sets to optimize how we store and process our data? So how do we speed up time to value from those data sets? We do an awful lot of work around the analytics and service space as well. So, you know, how do we automate data science? How do we reduce that time to value again? Now, that might be for things like real-time advertising, for example, but really helping to guide that strategy piece as well there. And the final piece, which is more in line with what we're going to talk about today, is around data governance and security. So this is really about bringing some data science into data governance. How do we help give you visibility into your data, regardless of where it is, what it is, how it's being accessed, and then how do we secure it and provide or enable you to apply governance policies to that infrastructure and those data sets, regardless of where it is and what it is. As I said earlier, we are consultancy led. We've developed a number of what we call our smart services, and these are really all around helping our clients to understand the landscape as it is today, understand what new technology sets are available to them, and how they can take advantage of them moving forward as part of their data transformation program. And they're key to what we're doing with clients today. I think there's a large proportion of customers that kind of know the end state they want to get to. They know where they're driving towards and what the target is, and they have a reasonable view of where they are today. But quite often, navigating that piece in the middle is difficult for them, because they're very, very focused, as most people are, on delivering BAU. Really, how do we maintain what we have today? And as data sets grow, and as the infrastructure becomes more diverse, how do we do that with less resource in a more complicated environment, and with probably the same or less budget? And I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case moving forward for a while at least. So they really look to us to partner with them to help them guide them through that and develop that strategy. So whether that's things like our smart data object and smart file assessment, which is all around understanding and providing optimization around storage infrastructure, or whether that's smart cloud strategy. So how do we take what you have on premise today and help you migrate that to the cloud? Or more aligned to the security and governance piece, our smart discovery offering, which is all around giving you visibility into your risk profile for your data and coming at it from a data-centric perspective. And they're really quite often the foundation of our engagements with our clients. And we've been very successful at delivering that over the last 8 years or so. Working with a number of organizations across multiple vertical markets, the different shapes and sizes, ranging from the likes of Genomics England to the leading genomic research organization in the UK, to the likes of WSP, one of the world's largest engineering firms, to Omnicom, one of the world's largest advertising and media groups. The thing that binds all of them is that kind of drive for data transformation, and that drive to do things better, to leverage new technologies to kind of gain efficiencies on what they're doing today, work faster, work smarter, and really drive transformation over their data services platforms. So with that in mind, I'm going to move on now to talk to you a little bit about SASE and Zero Trust Network access, and why that's becoming more and more relevant as the days pass, actually. And give you a little bit of a view into that as well. So what is it? What is SASE? Where's it come from? Why is it important? So SASE is effectively a new category that Gartner introduced, and it's really the combination of what were discretely separate security and networking capabilities. So, if you look at secure web gateway, CASB, firewalls, next-gen firewalls, SD-WAN, it's the combination of those technology sets into a single platform that really is helping you to support a more hybrid approach. So, it's ensuring that we provide that level of security, that level of network performance and access requirement across on-premise and in cloud platforms, all in a single unified place. We want to provide real-time context and security over that data, regardless of where it is and what it is. Now, the reason that this is becoming relevant, I think as a market category, the likes of Gartner are expecting big things of it in any case. So their initial view was that there'd be 40% adoption of that technology or technologies in that space by 2024. That was pre-COVID. Personally, I think it'd be quite interesting to see what that number looks like post-COVID, because I think there is going to be a huge impact in that sense. But that was really driven from the fact that there's kind of a clear need for simplified access and control of data. And that needs to be across more than just the data center, right? Traditional tool sets don't really have the capability to do that. Now, in some cases, that's because they don't have the right level of security coverage. So, things like API level visibility that you need to control data in the cloud. For example, it may be because, the platforms that are in place are limited and bound by physical hardware constraints, Again, scaling and scaling on demand is something very challenging when you've got physical restrictions over that infrastructure. Or it might just be that it's niche tech that kind of only does one thing, right? So all of these things combined are leading to, I guess, resource fatigue from a client perspective. So, the amount of people that you need to go and deliver these services and deliver a data governance program and a security program is causing resource fatigue. Too many tools, too much data, and it's beginning to sprawl. And that working environment is also only going to become more dynamic, right? I don't think it's kind of a question anymore as to whether people will use cloud. They are, and that's going to continue. Now, it's not right for everything, but it is right for certain things. So what you don't want to do is necessarily have to embed multiple different security platforms across and networking capabilities across multiple different environments if it can be avoided. Now, in the wake of COVID, there's also the added pressure from remote working, and that's one of the reasons why we're running today's session. We're having a number of clients come to us asking, how do we support that kind of large scale remote access? How do we overcome some of those physical limitations around things like VPN access, for example? And how do we make sure our remote workers aren't bypassing security and putting data in places that it shouldn't be, that aren't approved by the business, or just bypassing it altogether because they're on BYOD devices, And interestingly, reading a stat recently from Gartner, they surveyed a number of CFOs, and as part of that, and it was all around remote working, but as part of that, they found that 74% of the CFOs responding believe that remote working would be more of a permanent fixture post-COVID. And I think part of that comes down to the fact that, they are still working. They can gain access. They can do the things they need to do. So actually, it kind of removes some of the skepticism over how efficient people will be working remotely. So I think long term, that kind of remote access, remote working requirement is here to stay. So as a result, I don't think it's going to be good enough just to band-aid the situation for now without thinking to the future and thinking as to how that's going to impact the environment. And that's really what the guys at Netskope are doing with their platform, providing something that is long-term sustainable approach to that level of data governance, security, and network access. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of context before I hand over to Ross. And Ross is going to talk to you through their platform, a little bit of background as to what they're working on there.
That's great, Lee. Thank you very much. Let me just check you can hear me okay, and I'll carry on.
I can.
Perfect. Okay, great. So thanks for that intro. That was good. And you're absolutely right. Netskope is all about cloud security, but in today's kind of conversations, we're talking to people about remote working all the time. And a part of that is remote access, and a part of that is kind of keeping users secure and protecting your data when users are no longer in the office environment. Okay, which is what we're going to talk through in a moment. So again, thanks for the intro, and let's get started. So, of course, there was a time in the past when we all were based in the office. I mean, some of us maybe are too young to remember it, but I remember going to an office and working there. There was no way to take your work home or work remotely. And this kind of world was one where all of the efforts around security were, not not just the efforts, the budgets too, to be honest, was spent on the perimeter, right? That we could keep all the bad stuff on the outside and we kept all the good stuff on the inside. Our users, our devices, our data all remained within that perimeter. But really it was the advent of these devices, the laptops, that meant that we could begin to take work home with us. And when we did that, we needed a way to connect into the on-premises kind of servers and solutions that the organization had in order to fetch our mail or go to file shares and things like that, right? So, this in the office view is long gone. We can't focus our efforts on our perimeter anymore because many of our users are now obviously outside of it. As I say, in the present time, there's a lot of us working from home, and this isn't a picture of me and my beautiful, well-behaved dog. My dog tends to just bark when I'm on calls like this, so if you hear him in a little while, I apologise. But we're all, in some cases, mandated to be working from home at the moment, perhaps in lockdown situations, and so businesses are seeing a new trend, as I say, that's been forced upon them, of users working outside of the office. And in fact, Netskope's been tracking some of that change in behaviour. Because we run a cloud platform that our customers and the users of those customers run through, we can see when they're in the office within defined locations and when those users are outside of the office coming from a variety of different locations. And this tracks that trend over time from back in October 2019 through to almost the present day. So you can see generally we see sort of 25–27% of the workforce working remotely. There's a couple of spikes in the middle there, which equates to Christmas Day and New Year's Day, when we see a little burst of activity from home. But towards the end of February, beginning of March, things started to turn upwards, and now we see this trend of around 65–70% of our customers, employees, working outside of the fixed office locations. And possibly that number's a little higher. In reality, we hear the press talking about 80–90% of our users perhaps working from home if they're possible, if it's possible for them to do so. Read more about that kind of research, if you like, in our blogs. So one day, once we're through the current crisis, perhaps we'll be working from anywhere, right? So perhaps we dream of being out on the beach at the moment, maybe not checking our email. But it's certainly a possibility with the new connectivity options coming around the corner, like 5G rolling out and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, I think we have to accept that we have remote workers and we're not going to always know where they are. And so perhaps we need to change our mindset slightly and not worry about where they are and just treat them all the same. Whether they're in the office or out of the office, they should receive the same protection. We should have the same visibility. They should have the same user experience, ideally. So if we can't tell where our users are, and we're not going to worry about that so much, one thing we can tell is where they're going. So we do know that remote workers, just like any other employees, will be going to websites. We've been doing that for decades, and we will continue to do that. But we also know that users are now going to cloud applications. The growth in cloud applications over the past decade or so has been very steep. We now know that for an average enterprise, if we look at this balance between cloud application usage and website visiting, it's about 85% of the traffic is going to cloud applications now. And some of those cloud apps will have been are managed by the business and provisioned to the users for them to work with. Others of those cloud apps will be applications that the users have discovered and found themselves, and IT doesn't have management of. So those unmanaged apps, sometimes called shadow IT. And then there's somewhere else that our remote workers would want to go, and that will be perhaps back to the organization's private apps or resources or servers that are based in a more on-premise environment. So, a traditional data center with some applications in it, I've put a few examples in there, is one place that users, when they're remote, might want to connect back to. But of course, with this move to cloud, a lot of those applications will be moving into the public cloud environments or the IaaS platforms, so AWS and Microsoft Azure, GCP, for example. So this, when we look at it, is the destinations that remote workers would want to go to. And if there isn't really anywhere else, and if we had a solution for securing and enabling access to these places, then we'd be in a good place. So we're going to take a look first at, remote access, which is connecting these users into the data centers and public cloud environments so that they can access these private applications. And I thought I'd add a theme to this webinar, one that I've used before, and that's the theme of top trumps. So hopefully many of you on the call know top trumps and be familiar with it from your childhood, or perhaps your adulthood if you're a big fan, or if you've got kids of your own. And this theme will make sense in a moment, but what I thought I'd do, just in case there was anybody that didn't know what top trumps were, they obviously can be found when we're allowed outside in your nearby toy store. You'll often see this kind of a display. If you go to Hamleys in London, you'll see their Harry Potter top trumps display. As you can tell, I'm a bit of a fan. But for anyone that's not familiar, I thought we'd play the game quickly. So top trumps, Creatures of the Deep was the deck that I've chosen. And to play, you need to split your deck in half. So I figured I could play with Lee here. Lee, I'm going to give you this pile of cards here, and I'm going to draw the first card for you. And you've got an octopus. And I'm just going to ask you to choose your favourite factor for the octopus.
I'm going to pick depth, please.
Yeah. Good strategy for top trumps is always to pick the biggest number on the card, so I can't blame you for choosing depth. So then I pull my card. Now I've got the great white shark. Unfortunately, I can go deeper. So I beat Lee in this instance, and I get to keep his card. And then we keep on going until one or other of us has no cards left. So, Freaky Factor was the one to choose there, Lee, for future reference. But moving on. Anyway, so why am I talking about top trumps? Because what I thought we could do is top trumps for remote access. Let's look at the ways that you can do remote access, and let's use the basic kind of scoring and comparison mechanism of top trumps to evaluate them, right? So it might be the most boring game of top trumps ever, but it serves its purpose in this presentation. So let's start with that traditional remote access to the data center, which is most often achieved with something like a VPN concentrator. And this is a process that we're all familiar with, we've probably used in the past. We have a VPN client installed on our device. It connects to the VPN concentrator in the data center. So there needs to be some inbound connection here into the VPN concentrator, into the network environment. We authenticate. Hopefully that will be some form of strong authentication with some one-time password or token. And that then gives us access to everything in that network. Okay, this is a remote access VPN. So we're giving it an IP address, and we can then access everything in that environment. So now the flaw with this, I guess, is that, well, there's a couple of flaws with this, but the main one is this wide network level access that we're provided with. When we give someone access to our entire network, regardless of what they actually need access to, we're kind of really going against the principles of zero trust, which are pretty well understood and well recommended nowadays. I can move laterally within the network. Although I'm supposed to be accessing only the Oracle database, I can actually access other resources and I can explore that environment. Now, if I'm a malicious insider, that might mean that I could log in legitimately and then go to places I shouldn't, cause damage, steal data, whatever it might be, plant further compromise, whatever. If someone is operating with compromised credentials and I've actually got a malicious third party accessing my environment, once again, they now have this ability to move laterally within the network, which is only a bad thing. So let's look at our first top trumps card, and this is for remote access VPNs into a data center. So the security, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. Because of that ability to move laterally within the network, we can really improve on that security stance. And then for the user experience, and then the complexity of the solution and the admin burden from an IT perspective, I've kind of chosen middle of the road figures for those, because this is a well understood kind of deployment. We're familiar with it, we know how to manage it, the kit's familiar, and so on. So nothing, no choice either way there, just middle of the road figures. So let's have a look at perhaps how things change when we extend this method into the public cloud environment. So now we're an organization that's moved some of our apps into public cloud. Like many organizations, we're not just using one public cloud environment. Perhaps we have several, bit of Azure, a bit of GCP perhaps, a bit of AWS, or have separate networks within AWS, different accounts and so on and so forth. Now, if my apps are split across those different environments, it means that I actually need to VPN into each of them separately because they are separate networks, they're not connected. And if I were to try and provision this kind of access to the end user, it would place all of the onus on the end user to understand which VPN they needed to access which app. They would have to keep some record or have some note of that, and they would have to tear down one VPN to fire up another when they needed different apps. Basically, this isn't a very usable solution to accessing apps in the public cloud. So for that reason, when we look at our top trumps card for this setup, we've still got the same security problem. The same lateral movement is available, the same broad network level access, but we've really impacted the user experience by sort of forcing this kind of need for them to understand the environment and understand which VPNs they need to use for what. And that then reflects on the complexity of the solution and very specifically the admin burden, because your tickets are going to go through the roof because the users are going to forget how to do this. Okay, so this isn't a good solution, and for that reason we don't actually see it very often as a way to access resources in the public cloud environments. One thing we do see, perhaps worryingly, is people kind of giving up on the VPN thing and just simply publishing their private apps out to the internet so that their remote workers can access them. So this might seem like a very simple solution, and therefore maybe a good solution in some people's eyes. But of course, exposing anything to the internet publicly means that you can't guarantee who it is that's accessing it, right? You're very dependent on your authentication if you're going to do this. And we don't want to just rely on authentication, because we've seen examples of compromise or misconfiguration that would mean these environments would be exposed and access would be allowed unintentionally. So, exposing things publicly on the internet, things that are supposed to be private, cannot be a good idea. So for my top trumps card for this scenario, I've put my security right down to 1. Ironically, the complexity and admin burden are quite low. So it's got them 2 because, we've removed any VPNs or anything. And a user experience might actually be quite simple, but we are dependent on the sort of vagaries of the internet here to route between the users and the cloud. We're not using any of our own private infrastructure. So, the user experience may suffer a little. So I've knocked a few points off there. But ultimately, we can't forgive this, security score of 1. When we expose things that are supposed to be private onto the public internet, we know what happens, and we've seen the headlines. So whether it's AWS buckets exposed publicly or AWS's servers used by Tesla misconfigured and hijacked by crypto miners, there's plenty of stories out there you can find about doing this. Generally a bad idea. Let's move on to what is probably the most common way of allowing access for remote workers into the public cloud environments or the apps within there, and that's to do this hairpinning or backhauling of traffic. So the user still has their original VPN into the data center, but now the data center is connected to the public cloud environments, and that means that the user has to traverse through the data center in order to get there. And okay, you've simplified the end user experience here because they've just got that one VPN, in fact the same VPN. But you're still in the position of exposing very widely all of the networks, so we've still got that same security problem. And if the user is a long way from the data center, and they're perhaps accessing a public cloud environment that's a long way from the data center, you're adding in this big end-to-end latency between the user and the public cloud. So worst case, if the user was in Singapore and the corporate data centers in San Francisco, and then the public cloud service they're accessing is also in Singapore, then you've got this huge, great round trip for something that should be accessed directly with a very short link. So for these reasons, our security remains poor. All of our solutions really haven't offered the best security. Our user experience is compromised when the user's geographical distance from the data center changes. And actually that then puts burden on the IT teams. And one of the solutions we've seen customers come up with to this is actually then to create points of presence, additional data centers around the world just to solve this latency problem. So, you end up subscribing to and utilizing a public cloud service to then only have to create more data center environments to access it, which is crazy, right? We don't want to be doing that. So let's look at some ways to get around some of these limitations and improve things. But before we do that, let's talk about today's scenario, which is this scaling problem, right? So generally, perhaps access is okay through your VPN concentrators, your data center or your public cloud. But what happens, as it has done recently, when suddenly your user population working remotely goes from your predicted and usual 30% of the workforce to the 70 or 80% of the workforce that you now see. So what happens is our VPN concentrator runs pretty hot. The bandwidth through our data center is consumed, and ultimately we end up with a end user experience problem. Okay, so you end up with slowness. Users can't access or use the tools that they need to, and it becomes unworkable. What also is the case that the only way to scale that is to probably add more hardware. And getting hold of the hardware can be difficult in a crisis like now. Just like the supermarket shelves, getting hold of VPN concentrator hardware at the moment is a little bit tricky in some cases. So in this scenario, what we've really compromised is the admin burden. The IT teams are going to be scrambling to try and deal with this situation as users complain about the user experience and so on. So this short-term scaling is an issue when you're bound by a physical appliance that has physical limits as to what it can do. So the largest of organizations are kind of suffering with this at the moment. And there was this headline, I couldn't resist it, about Cisco a couple of weeks ago. They've suddenly got hundreds of thousands of home workers, and they're trying to work around this problem of bottlenecks, right? So they're routing remote workers through parts of the world that are offline, so kind of follow the moon model, as they call it, so that they can try and spread some of the load across their entire infrastructure and route it around the world. So probably keep things moving, but it's not going to offer the best performance or user experience. So what can we do instead? Well, I'm going to give you an example of Zero Trust Network Access, or ZTNA as it gets abbreviated to. And I'm going to use Netskope's solution as one that's familiar to me for providing Zero Trust Network Access. So the principles here are that we have a security cloud, and it acts as an intermediary, if you like. So the user isn't connecting directly into any of the private environments where the applications are. Instead, they install an endpoint client, we see it here labeled the Netskope client, that connects them into the security cloud. Now that Netskope client can do a couple of things. It can guarantee the identity of the user by authenticating them, but it can also check the security posture of the device. So this is kind of a zero trust principle, right? That we verify the user, but we also verify the device that is authorized. So is it encrypted? Does it run the correct AV or anti-malware engines? Does it carry a certificate that proves that it belongs to us? Those kinds of posture checks. And if they're passed, then it can connect to the Netskope security cloud in this case. Now, on the other end of the picture, within our private environments, we need something to terminate, if you like, or hand off the connections that are going to be coming into the application. So we deploy something called a Netskope publisher. So this is a software-based solution, a virtual appliance, if you like, that can be put into either virtualization platforms or run as virtual machines within the public cloud environments. What's most important about this, other than it just takes a few minutes to deploy, is that it connects outbound from the private environment to the Netskope cloud. So that means there's no inbound access from the internet into your private environments at all. The tunnel is built from the inside out, and that means that the only way for traffic to come into that environment is down that tunnel by having been validated by the security cloud. So what that then means is the Netskope publisher can make or help enforce the policy that's defined for a user accessing an application. So this is where we really get down to the principles of kind of least privilege. So if I have a user, let's say it's myself, Ross, is in a particular group that allows me to access the Oracle database, then that policy that's set within the security cloud is enforced by the publisher, and I am connected to just that application or just that resource that I'm entitled to and not anything else. I cannot move laterally within the environment if it's not me, but someone that's compromised my credentials. All they can get to is the Oracle database. They can't explore any further or seek to compromise any further. So this is the zero trust piece of zero trust network access. And of course, those Netskope publishers, as I said, can be deployed into the public cloud environments, and they all sync back to the Netskope cloud, which in this diagram makes it look like it's sort of one point in one place. But in reality, that cloud is a global infrastructure, a high-performance global infrastructure. That means wherever your users are, they'll pick the nearest point of presence to connect through to the public cloud environments. And this security cloud obviously peers and is well connected with many of the public cloud environments that are needing to be accessed. So what you're doing here is getting away from that any kind of backhauling or hairpinning of traffic through any specific data center by leveraging a service, right? And so we've solved the hairpinning solution. We've improved on the security posture. We've simplified deployment. We've generally covered off all of those challenges that we saw with the previous mechanisms we looked at. So for that reason, when we look at scoring zero trust network access, or specifically, let's look at Netskope's private access solution, we score them the same. We've got pretty good marks here. We've improved the security, we've given a good user experience to the user, because they're just going to request the resource they want, and the security cloud takes care of connecting them. And we've kept things nice and simple too. So not full marks, not yet, but pretty good marks for the zero trust network access as a solution. But let's have a quick look at the other places that remote workers wanted to go. Right at the start, I said that also websites and cloud apps were important. And what's often the case is that these also have a bearing on the VPN, because what people are doing is doing this, again, hairpinning or backhauling of traffic. So when a user is remote and they want to access the web or a cloud application, they're having to VPN through the data center in order for security controls to be enforced by what is usually some form of traditional secure web gateway or proxy. The issue with this is as bandwidth demands increase, and that's again what we've seen like recently. When we do our team calls, they look a bit like this, with dozens and dozens of people on there, all streaming video and so on. And when you start adding this much load onto this kind of hairpinning setup, you're again going to start affecting performance. You're going to consume a lot of bandwidth in and out the data center. You're going to place a lot of load on the VPN concentrator. And to what end? Because actually, in this example, some Zoom traffic, the secure web gateway adds no value at all. It can't inspect or do anything with video stream traffic. So this isn't a good way to architect your network for security and for remote workers. So what some organizations then do is they do a form of split tunneling. So they say, well, we'll VPN the stuff that needs to come back to the corporate data center, but we'll let users go direct to cloud applications and websites, right? Because then they're going to get a better performance, a better user experience. We're not going to overload our data center. Problem is, if you're taking this decision right now, it's exactly now that actually there's this massive increase in cloud application usage, especially things like collaboration apps. So you see a headline here about Microsoft Teams, another one about Slack, adding thousands of users in the past few weeks. And it's these tools that then pose a risk to your data, right? So if users are using these tools to collaborate, whether you've given them those tools or whether they found them themselves, they now have the ability to upload, share, and collaborate with data that you might not want them to. So how are you going to govern data that's going in and out of these collaboration apps and potentially being shared from them? How are you going to govern that if you've just bypassed the only security control you had? Now, this does assume that whatever that appliance proxy is capable of providing security on these environments. So that might be the case that it's not very good at doing that. So what could we do, I guess, is the question about these websites and cloud apps being accessed by remote workers. So, well, we need to provide some security. That was the whole point of these secure web gateway. And if we look at the sorts of threats we're seeing out there at the moment to do with the current crisis, then, in 4 days in March, we saw 3,500 coronavirus domains registered. Many of these will be used for malicious purposes, phishing, and so on. Including in this list, I noticed coronavirus dating, which, you've got to hope maybe this was some sort of automated algorithm rather than someone's choice of a good idea to put that in there. But, just a couple of weeks ago, we were up to, this list had just over 68,000 coronavirus related domains that were known to be malicious. So, this is a big problem. Phishing, people taking advantage of the current crisis is happening. And actually, any traditional secure web gateway should be able to block this kind of threat, right? We can always import a list of domains or URLs that can be blocked, and we need that to be done. But where things get more interesting is perhaps a more sophisticated threat like this one. So it starts with a phishing email maybe that's themed around the current pandemic, and it contains a link. You see here there's a link to a SharePoint site to download what it says is some emergency contact numbers or whatever. The point is, when you follow that, you do go to a SharePoint site, because cybercriminals are using these tools to deliver payloads because they know that they will be available from within organizations. Nobody blocks access to Office 365 because generally they're using it. So they're going to be able to allow this download to take place. And what does get downloaded is an Excel file, but it's weaponized. It has some macros in it maybe. And those macros call out to a different cloud application, something like Google Drive, and they make a request for malware, which is downloaded onto the machine. Now, we've seen malware downloaded in this manner that is actually command and control. So it goes out and fetches its configuration to dictate how it behaves from a service like GitHub, and then it uses command and control to a service like Slack. And it's from Slack that the cybercriminal can issue commands to that malware to instruct it to do things such as install further software on the device, or log the keys, or grab a screenshot, or exfiltrate a file and upload it somewhere. And again, we see these types of threats are using common cloud services to exfiltrate data. So the reason all of this happens with these cloud services is because they know that these services aren't likely to be blocked. And actually, if it's a more advanced threat, they will do some reconnaissance to understand what applications your organization is using in order to define the apps they're going to use that are more likely to succeed. So what we're looking at here is a kill chain, a cloud-enabled kill chain, if you like, where we see reconnaissance, weaponization, exploits, installs, and so on, across the traditional cyber kill chain, but this time using cloud. So what do you need to protect against that? Well, you need something more sophisticated, right? So I'm going to position a next generation secure web gateway to help you with this. And that's going to be providing threat protection to cover off what we've just seen, but also it's going to understand enough about cloud apps to provide some decent data protection as well. So what does that mean? Well, let's look into this next generation secure web gateway. Let's see, what would you want it to do? Well, let's say we had a remote worker, here's Kate, she's working in a coffee shop and she's accessing Slack, okay? That's about the information that a traditional secure web gateway might give you, but what do we need to know to actually properly control what she's doing? Because if she's just using Slack, she could be uploading data, she could be downloading a virus, who knows? So what we want from our next-gen secure web gateway is the identity of the user. And I've already told you it's Kate, but we want our solution to know that too. And maybe we want to set up a policy around that user or that group of users. We want to identify that she's remote because we may have a different policy for someone when they're remote from when they're in the office, or we may have different policies for different countries because we may deem them to be higher risk locations. We want to identify if Kate's on her laptop or perhaps on a personal device, or if her laptop for some reason doesn't meet our security requirements, her AV is not running or the disk's not encrypted. Again, that could affect our policy. So these are principles, again, a little bit of zero trust, and we're kind of us applying zero trust here to cloud access, perhaps. Now, she's accessing Slack, but more than just accessing Slack, we want to know what account on Slack she's accessing, right? There's a big difference between her accessing the company's Slack and uploading a file and her uploading something to her personal instance of Slack or somebody else's Slack channels, for example. So this ability to differentiate between instances is what protects us against all those threats we saw on the previous slide. Because if we can tell the difference between our Google account or our Office 365 environment and somebody else's, we can immediately negate all of the kind of threats that use those tools to download exploits or exfiltrate data. And we also want to tell the activity that Kate's taking, because again, if she's downloading things from Slack, or maybe I'm not too bothered, but if she's uploading stuff, then my ears prick up and I think, what is it she's uploading? Which brings us to the last thing that we want to understand, which is the actual data itself. If she's uploading financial data to her personal Slack account, this is now probably a breach, something I don't want to be happening. And I can identify the content by decrypting the session that she's having with Slack, and then applying some sort of DLP identifiers or picking up on classifications within the file to establish its sensitivity. So to achieve all of this, I need to be doing a few things. I need to be decrypting SSL traffic because all cloud applications run over SSL, right? Or TLS more correctly. I need to decode the cloud traffic to understand what's happening. It's no good just saying you went to slack.com. I need to go deeper into the calls and the XML, the JSON that the browser and the app are using to communicate. And that can tell me the activities. It can tell me the account that's being accessed. And then I need to have an understanding or be able to do that for thousands of cloud services because there are thousands of them out there, right? So this is what an NG Secure Web Gateway looks like, a next generation Secure Web Gateway. And when we couple it together with our Zero Trust Network Access, which is providing fast and scalable access to private apps, then, like I said right back at the start, we have a solution that covers off and enables access to and provides protection for all of the destinations that a remote worker might want to go to. And so where does this take us? Well, it takes us to the conclusion that actually our top trumps card, which beats all others, is for the Netskope Security Cloud that not only provides the remote access, but also governs and manages and secures the remote workers when they're going to these other locations. So this is my top trumps card, the top card in my pack. So it's right up there with the great white shark that we saw earlier, but also my Gigantosaurus and my Optimus Prime and my Harry Potter cards, all my favorite top trumps cards there. So the Netskope Security Cloud, then, what we're doing with this consolidation of services is really moving you towards an end game that I'm going to reveal in a second. So you see Zero Trust Network Access on the left there, part of the Netskope Security Cloud that also has that secure web gateway capability coupled with the DLP to protect your data and so on. But really what we're heading to, and Lee hinted at this earlier, is this Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE, that Gartner's defined. And it encompasses not just ETNA, as you see it there, or for that matter, SWIG or CASB or DLP, but also some of the network elements of network security and network elements that we've traditionally perhaps run on premises, but now we need to push out into the cloud, because to protect access to the cloud, we do need to be in the cloud, because that's, that's where our users are. The thought of doing things on premises, with appliance and the like, and making remote users come back to a data center to access the cloud is really something we need to move away from. And the world is generally moving away from that. And it will be interesting to see what additional technologies may become a part of SASE in the future. But that's the conclusion I kind of wanted to leave you with. So if you want to start a journey towards SASE, then have a chat with Nefos or ourselves, and we'll talk to you about that. And let me hand back to Lee for him to do a little wrap up now.
Thanks, Ross. That's great. That is great. I'm just going to flick over. So what next? What do we do next? How do we take a look at this in more detail? So I just wanted to quickly recap a little bit on what Ross was saying there, and then leave you with a little bit of an idea as to how we can take that conversation forward. And that should leave us a little bit of time for Q&A if anyone's got any questions that they want to submit via the chat function. So from our perspective, it's quite interesting, because when we as a business look for new technology to bring into our portfolio, there are quite a few things that we look for. And in Netskope's case, the thing that really made them stand out from the crowd was kind of the future vision, really. So if you wind the clock back 3-4 years, it was very much a CASB focus, and the development of the Netskope platform actually to move in this direction has been extremely rapid. And from our perspective, the reason that we think it kind of stands out is one, it's breadth. We believe it's got the greatest breadth out there. So that's in terms of things like the number of cloud services that are supported, the various different facets that Ross touched on. It's CASB, it's ZTNA, it's secure web gateway, it's all of these component parts. And actually, when we speak to customers, the real value there is that it's all under one roof. In quite a lot of cases, what we find is that some of the other vendors in these spaces growing by acquisition predominantly, and what they've not really done is kind of integrate the management of those various different acquisitions. So actually, operationally, it doesn't really bring anything to the party. Yes, it gives you some extra functionality, but you're still having to manage the operational burden of managing like 4 or 5 different things. And that was really, really key for us when we looked at bringing Netskope into our portfolio. And the other thing is that as Ross just touched on, actually, it's born in the cloud. So its ability to scale on demand at scale and quickly, with no reliance on physical hardware or any of those limitations that go with it, is a real unique in the market. And I think that combined with, I guess, the richness of the overall vision and the capability that they have under one management platform is what makes it really, really a differentiated offering. And it is all delivered as a single service or as a service, to the point where we've actually, as Nefos, we've developed our own managed service offering on top of that to incorporate some other aspects like multi-factor authentication and IDAM, as Ross mentioned earlier. So what do we do? How can we move that on? So we think there are a couple of options for you out there. If you'd like to see the platform in more detail, we're more than happy to schedule one-to-one demonstrations, so you can dig into a bit more detail there if it's of interest for you. We have actually, as a business, opened up access to our consulting and support teams for our customers as part of the COVID kind of situation going on. So we are opening up some free kind of initial consultation sessions with some of our consulting guys, just to have a quick high-level chat around data governance and strategy in that space. And lastly, we have our Smart Discovery service. So that's more of a longer-term engagement, really, where we're helping customers to provide to get visibility into their current risk when it comes to data. So, you know, the various scenarios that Ross mentioned, you know, how do we get visibility into where these data assets are going and what's moving through the business and out of the business in many cases. So I guess with that in mind, it just leaves me to say thank you for joining us. We'll open up the floor for any questions now that you can submit via the chat button. So let's see if we've got anything there just before we close up, really. So 1 second. So I've got one. So the question is, and Ross, this might be one for you, I guess. Current crisis is putting a spotlight on remote access, but will ZTNA still be relevant in 12 to 18 months? Is it going to matter long term?
Well, I think there's no doubt that we've seen an uptake in people wanting to talk to us about ZTNA, you know, and struggling with the challenges I kind of outlined. So the spotlight is definitely on it. I think people were having those conversations before the current crisis, and so I see no reason why they wouldn't continue afterwards. I also think that probably the new normal, to use the phrase that's been coined, will involve more people working remotely than they have done before, say, the current crisis. So I think it will be relevant. You know, there's still benefits to ZTNA outside of just dealing with large numbers of remote workers. You know, that security enhancement that's provided by the principles of zero trust, you know, is real enough that organizations will choose it for that reason alone. So yeah, I think it will still have a relevance. I do think it will consolidate with other services, and we've obviously positioned SASE as the direction that could go in. So I think it'll be relevant. It'll be part of something bigger, and you'll see vendors, you know, rolling it into other solutions and together with other solutions. And Netskope intends to be on the forefront of that. So yeah, I think it'll still be relevant in 12 to 18 months' time and moving forward beyond that, until a point, I guess, where people don't have on-premise data centers anymore. But that seems unlikely. It's going to be around for a long while, right? And even if they disappear, you're still going to need to get into those public cloud environments probably to access applications that you develop yourself. You know, you're not going to be able to move 100% to a SaaS-based delivery of your applications and services. So I think there'll always be a need to connect into those private environments. And today, ZTNA is the easiest and most secure way to do it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I'm guessing as part of that, you're seeing increased usage in terms of your platform. Well, we've got a question from someone else on here. What's the difference between Netskope and other ZTNA vendors?
Yeah, okay, good question. So there's there's like a couple of dozen zero trust network access vendors out there. The way to sort of bring it down to a short list pretty quickly is to look at those to support connections to applications that aren't web-based. So, you know, if you've got web-based applications that you're accessing, i.e. apps that you use through a browser, then you've got quite a wide choice. But as soon as you say, I want to access something via SSH, or I need to RDP, you know, remote desktop to a machine, or I need to carry some other native application traffic, then it drops to just a handful. In fact, you know, less than I can count on one hand. And it includes Netskope, obviously. So that's one way to shortlist. I mean, the biggest difference between Netskope and other ZTNA vendors is the wider platform. And obviously I've kind of positioned that today and talked about it. But, you know, your mission when you're looking at remote workers isn't just to provide them with remote access. You need to be able to secure the other places they're going as well. And ideally, you want to be doing that in a single platform, because then you just have to worry about a single client on the endpoint. You only have to define your policies in one place, all your reporting analytics is in one place. So you got this one client, one cloud, one policy, and that's great value when it comes to simplifying the way that you manage your security operations.
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, kind of on the same thread, we got one last question before we close up. One of the other questions we got out there is, in terms of the Netskope MPA, how easy is it to get implemented and operational?
Yeah, okay, good question. Obviously, every environment's different. I'm going to caveat it with that. But compared to a traditional appliance-based VPN concentrator setup, it's pretty straightforward. Now, if you're an existing Netskope customer already and making use of our next-gen secure web gateway or some of our other capabilities, then to add NPA is super simple, because you've got your Netskope tenant set up, you've got your client deployed, potentially already performing another function. And therefore it's just a tick in a box and deploy that Netskope publisher in the data center, off we go. So that's pretty straightforward. But even if you're not a Netskope customer already, then we are a cloud-based service. There's no shipping of equipment. It's very much with a bit of hand holding from us or from Nefos. Then it would be very much a few hours to deploy MPA in some sort of pilot or evaluation environment, for sure. Obviously, there'd be larger considerations if you're moving it into production for thousands of users, and we can help you with that planning too. But it is pretty straightforward. Your first step is probably to go a little bit deeper than we have today. Maybe let's do a demo, or say set up a small pilot or trial. So do get in touch with Nefos or us directly if you wanted to do that.
Thank you. So I think that wraps up the questions, and we're running out of time there. But so we'll probably call it a day there. Again, just a thank you from, I'll leave contact details on the screen for you, but just a thank you again for joining us this morning. Thanks to Ross for taking some time out to jump on board and provide that introduction. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to speak in the future. The webinar is being recorded. You will be sent a follow-up mail with access to the recording afterwards as well. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. So thank you again, and we'll conclude there.